Welcome. Tonight, we will journey slowly through the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. Let your body settle into the bed. Let your shoulders soften. Allow your breathing to slow in its own time. You do not need to remember every name or follow every detail. This is not a lesson or a test. It is a story to rest inside. We will begin with the creation of the heavens and the earth. We will walk through the Garden of Eden, listen to the rain around Noah's Ark, follow Abraham into an unknown land, and enter Egypt with Joseph and his family. If your attention drifts, let it drift. If you fall asleep before the story ends, that is exactly as it should be. Outside, rain falls steadily. The room is still, and our story begins before there were cities, nations, or stars in the night sky, before continents had names, before any human voice had spoken. There was God and a world waiting to be formed. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis means beginning. It is the first book of the Bible, the opening pages of the entire story that the rest of Scripture continues to tell. And it answers some of the oldest questions a person can ask. Where did the world come from? Who are we? How did wrong and sorrow first enter a world that God had made good? And why does the world often feel broken? Genesis also begins to answer a quieter question. If the world went wrong, does God still have a plan? The rest of the book, and in many ways the rest of the whole Bible, is God's first steps toward an answer. The book falls naturally into two unequal halves. The first 11 chapters describe the whole world, its beginning, its first family, its early failures, and its slow spread. Within those early chapters, we meet a great many beginnings at once. The beginning of light and land and living creatures. The beginning of marriage and work and rest. And, not long after, the beginning of things going wrong. Those early chapters move quickly, almost like a wide-angle view of the whole earth. Entire centuries pass within a few short verses. Whole nations rise. It can feel, at times, like watching clouds move quickly over a long stretch of countryside. The remaining chapters narrow their focus. They follow one family, beginning with a man named Abraham, and moving through his son, his grandson, and his great-grandson, 4 generations, carrying the very same quiet promise a little further each time. Once we reach that family, the pace of the story changes completely. Genesis slows down and lingers. It shows us ordinary conversations, small decisions, private fears, and quiet moments beside wells and campfires. As if the story itself has finally decided to sit down and rest a while. It can help, tonight, to picture the whole book as a wide river slowly narrowing into a single stream. It begins as broad as the entire world, touching every nation and every people. Then, gently, it narrows until it is following the quiet footsteps of one family, walking through deserts and tents and ordinary days. Genesis begins with the whole world, but gradually narrows its focus to one family. Through that family, God begins a promise that will eventually reach every nation. A promise this single book alone will only begin to unfold. This is where the story of Israel begins. Not with a nation already formed, but with a single man, willing to leave his home because God asked him to. It is worth noticing, even now, how small that beginning was. One elderly couple, one tent, one uncertain road leading toward a country they had never seen. Nothing about it looked like the beginning of a nation, and yet, quietly, it was. This is, in fact, one of the quiet patterns you will notice again and again tonight. God rarely begins with something large and impressive. He tends to begin small, unnoticed, almost hidden, and let the story grow slowly from there. The way a single seed becomes, eventually, an entire orchard. Between the larger stories, Genesis also carries long, generation after generation. We will not linger on these tonight. They exist mostly to show that time was passing and that God's promise was being carried forward, quietly, through ordinary families, even when nothing remarkable seemed to be happening. We will meet that man a little later tonight. For now, it is enough to know the shape of the road ahead. A wide beginning, narrowing gently into the story of one household, carrying a promise meant for everyone. You will hear names tonight that may be unfamiliar. Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. You do not need to hold on to every one of them. If all you remember by morning is this, that God made a good world, that the world went wrong, and that God has been quietly working to make things right ever since, that is enough. That is, in many ways. Genesis is sometimes called a book of beginnings, but it could just as easily be called a book of patience. Nearly everyone in it waits for something. We will meet that patience again and again tonight, in different shapes, in different lives. People have found comfort in this book for a very long time, across many different centuries, and many different kinds of nights, long before recorded sound, long before written translations reached every language. These same stories were told aloud, quietly, from one generation to the next, in tents, and later in homes, in exactly the same unhurried way we are hearing them now. There is something steadying in that thought tonight. Whatever you are carrying into sleep this evening, you are joining a very long line of tired, hopeful people listening to this same old story, in search of the same quiet rest. You may also notice, as the night goes on, how often God gives someone a new name right at the turning point of their story. It happens to Abram, and later to Jacob. Each time, a changed relationship with God, followed gently by a changed identity. You will also notice, tonight, the same promise being repeated, almost word for word, to one generation after another. God says nearly the same thing to Abraham that he later says to Isaac, and then again to Jacob. This is not the story repeating itself by accident. It is a promise being carried carefully forward, confirmed again to each new pair of hands. There is something quietly reassuring in that repetition. If you let yourself notice it tonight, the promise does not weaken as it passes from father to son. If anything, it grows steadier, confirmed again and again, across more time and more uncertainty than any one person could have carried alone. Before there was Abraham, before there was Israel, and before there was a promised land, there was only God and a world waiting to be formed. In the beginning, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness lay over the deep, and the Spirit of God moved gently over the surface of the waters, hovering there, patiently, the way a bird might hover briefly above a nest before finally settling into it. Nothing about this darkness was frightening. It was simply unfinished, the way a canvas is unfinished before the first stroke of color is added, or a quiet room is unfinished before the lamp is lit. There was no sun yet, no moon, no small orchard of stars scattered overhead. Only the deep and the water and the quiet presence of God, moving gently above it all, like a hand resting lightly on the surface of a still lake. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. He called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Notice, tonight, that even the darkness was given a name and a place. It was not cast out of the story or treated as a mistake. It was simply set apart and given its own quiet portion of every day. The way night still belongs to you now, as much as morning does. To name something in this ancient world was to bring order to it, to give it a settled place within a larger whole. God named the day and the night, and later the sky and the land and the seas, gently organizing a world that had begun only moments earlier, as formless and empty. Each of these 6 days follows the very same gentle rhythm. God speaks, and something new comes into being. God looks at what he has made and calls it good, and then evening comes, and morning, closing one day, and quietly opening the next. And there was evening, and there was morning. The first day had come and gone. On the second day, God shaped the sky. He separated the waters above from the waters below, and set the wide expanse of heaven between them, calm and open, room enough for every cloud that would ever gather, and every gentle rain that would ever fall from them. You might imagine, tonight, the first quiet horizon, sky above, water below, and a wide open space settling gently between the two, ready to hold clouds and birds and, in time, the sound of falling rain. There is a simple kind of order beginning to appear here. Each day, God is not simply adding more things into a crowded pile. He is making room first, and then filling that room with exactly what belongs there, one careful layer at a time. This second day, curiously, is the only one of the 6 that God does not call good, at least not immediately. Some old readers have wondered whether this is simply because the work of separating waters was not yet finished, completed only on the following day, when dry ground finally appeared. Then there was evening, and there was morning. On the third day, God gathered the waters under the sky into one place, and dry ground appeared. He called the dry ground earth, and the gathered waters he called seas. This is the first day, tonight, that receives 2 separate blessings within a single day. First, the forming of dry land, and then, quickly after, the appearance of growing things upon it. It is as though this third day could not wait for the fourth to arrive before beginning to flourish. Then, from that ground, God brought forth grass, and every kind of green plant, and trees bearing fruit, each one carrying the seed of the next within itself. Life had begun to take root, quietly, and would never again need to be created from nothing. Generation simply following generation from that point forward. There is something quietly generous in this detail. God did not simply make trees for that one day. He made trees that would keep making more trees, long after that first evening had passed, carrying their own future quietly inside them, the way a single kindness can carry forward, unseen, for years. Notice, too, the pattern of blessing that begins here. On the very first day life appears, God does not simply create. He looks at what he has made, calls it good, and equips it to continue on its own. Long after that particular day has passed into evening. Picture, if it helps you settle, the very first green shoot breaking through soil that had never held life before. No one was there to see it happen. It happened simply because God had spoken, and the earth obeyed, and there was morning. On the fourth day, God set two great lights in the sky, a greater light to govern the day, and a lesser light to govern the night. He placed the stars there as well, scattered gently across the darkness, to mark the seasons, the days, and the years. Light itself was already present. From the very first day, long before the sun and moon were formed to hold. These two great lights were not the source of light itself, but were given, instead, to govern it, to mark its rhythms, faithfully, night after night, season after season. Picture, if you like, that first night sky, filled all at once with more stars than any person could ever count. Quiet lights, hung carefully in the dark, keeping time for every night that would follow, including this one. Every star you might glimpse tonight through a gap in the clouds, or every star you have ever looked up at on a clearer night, was placed with the same quiet care described in this one small verse. Even hidden behind rain clouds, as they likely are tonight, they are still exactly where they were placed. There is a small phrase that is easy to pass over quickly. The lights were given to mark seasons and days and years, before there was any calendar, any clock, any careful measurement of time. The sky itself was already keeping quiet count of it, and there was evening, then there was morning, the fourth day. On the fifth day, God filled the waters with living creatures, and filled the sky with birds of every kind, the great creatures of the deep, and every winged bird according to its kind. He blessed them and told them to be fruitful and to fill the sea and the sky. Let the water teem with living creatures, God said, and let birds fly above the earth, across the vast expanse of the sky. There is a kind of joyful abundance in this instruction, an entire ocean and an entire sky, given over at once to movement. This is also the very first blessing spoken anywhere in the story, extended first to creatures of water and air, before it is ever extended to any creature of the land. Somewhere in that first ocean, enormous creatures moved through the deep for the first time. Somewhere in that first sky, wings opened and caught the air and carried something, living aloft for the first time in the world's short history. It is a good day to imagine slowly and without hurry. The first splash of a fish breaking the surface of a brand new sea. The first quiet beat of wings, learning, in that very moment, what flight even was. Nothing needed to be taught. Everything simply knew, from its first breath, exactly how to be itself. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. On the sixth day, God formed the animals of the land, livestock and creeping things, and wild animals, each after their own kind. And God saw that this, too, was good. By now, a quiet rhythm has likely settled into your own listening tonight. The same rhythm repeated 6 times already. God speaks, something new appears. God looks. It is, in its own way, one of the oldest lullabies in existence. This same gentle pattern, repeated calmly, evening after evening, morning after morning, Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, after our likeness." So God created humanity in his own image. Male and female, he created them. There is a small but meaningful shift. Nearly everything else in creation is called into being with a simple command: let there be. But here, just before humanity's creation, the language turns thoughtful, almost deliberate. Let us make. As though this one act deserved a different kind of attention than everything that came before it. Of everything God had made so far, nothing else in the story is described quite this way. Not the light, not the sea, not even the vast stretch of stars. Only humanity is described as carrying God's own image, stamped quietly into the shape of every person who has ever lived since, including your own shape, resting quietly right now. He blessed them and gave them a place of honor within all he had made. Care for the earth, he told them. Tend it, and watch over every living thing within it. There's a gentleness in this instruction, easy to miss if we move too quickly. Humanity was not told to conquer the world or to use it up. It was told to tend it, the way a careful gardener tends something entrusted to their care, watching over it rather than simply taking from it. God also gave them every seed bearing plant and every tree with fruit containing seed for food, and gave the green plants to every animal as well. There was enough in this first design for every living creature to be fed without any need for one to go without, so that another could have plenty. God looked at everything he had made, and it was very good. By evening of this sixth day, every corner of the world stood filled and finished and inhabited, sky and sea and land, and every creature suited to each one, arranged with a care that left nothing forgotten and nothing out of place. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work. He did not rest because he was tired. He rested to complete the pattern of creation itself and to set apart a rhythm of rest for everything that would follow. It is a gentle thing to consider tonight of all nights. Rest was not an afterthought, added once the important work was finished. Rest was itself part of the design, built into the very shape of the week, from the very beginning of time. If rest was worth building into the fabric of creation itself, before a single person had ever grown tired, then perhaps your own rest tonight is not something to feel guilty about. Perhaps it too is simply part of the pattern, exactly as it was always meant to be. There is an old idea, carried gently through this chapter, that the seventh day was blessed and made holy, set apart from the six that came before it, not lesser than the days of work. If anything, treated with even greater care, it can be worth asking, quietly, whether you have allowed yourself that same kind of rest recently. Not the kind that only happens once the to-do list is finished, since the list is rarely ever finished, but the kind that is simply given, the way it was given to the very first week of the world. Looking back across all 6 days together, a pattern becomes easy to see. Light before life that needed life. Sky and sea before creatures that needed to swim or fly. Land and plants before animals that needed to graze. Nothing was ever made before the world was ready to receive it, and nothing was ever left wanting once it arrived. Nothing about this world was an accident. It was made with order and with purpose, and every part of it was given its place before humanity ever took even the pattern of your own evening. Tonight fits somewhere inside this ancient rhythm. Evening and then morning. Rest and then work. A pattern laid down before there was any person alive to follow it, and one you are simply stepping into now, the same way every generation before you has. Human beings were not an afterthought within this world. They carried God's own image, a dignity given to no other creature, and a closeness with their Maker that shaped the very beginning of their story. The world was complete, peaceful, and full of life. And within a garden prepared for them, the first man and woman lived without fear. God placed the first man, Adam, in a garden called Eden. It was a place of rivers and fruit trees and quiet abundance, prepared with great care before Adam ever arrived. 4 rivers flowed out from that garden, watering the land beyond it, named the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, flowing outward into the wider world, as if the garden's abundance were never meant to stay entirely contained within its own borders. Gold and precious stone are mentioned in passing in the land nearby, as if even the surrounding country carried some quiet echo of the garden's richness. Every tree that was pleasant to look at and good for food grew there, planted before Adam's arrival, waiting simply to be enjoyed rather than earned. There was no shortage in that garden, and nothing about it asked to be hurried through. The name Eden itself carries a quiet meaning. It suggests delight or pleasure, a place made not merely for survival, but for genuine enjoyment. Even before there was any sin to forgive or any hardship to endure, God had already planted a garden meant simply to be enjoyed. God gave Adam a simple task: tend the garden and watch over it. And God gave him one instruction: he could eat from any tree in the garden except one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Nearby stood another tree, the tree of life, though its meaning would not become clear until much later in the story. For now, it simply stood there, quiet, among the branches of the garden, unremarked upon, waiting. God brought the animals to Adam, one by one, and let him name each of them. It was, in its own way, an early kind of friendship, a shared task between Adam and his Maker, wandering through a garden with no one else in it yet. We can imagine, tonight, that quiet procession, each creature approaching in turn, and Adam considering it carefully, and speaking a name over it, the way you might once have been given a name yourself, spoken over you before you could understand. It must have taken a long, unhurried while, with no clock anywhere to measure it by. Picture the great, slow-moving animals passing by first, and then the quicker, smaller creatures darting past his feet, and the birds circling low enough to be named before rising again into the trees. Every creature waited its turn, patiently, as if it, too, understood. There was no need to hurry through any part of that first, unrepeatable afternoon. Yet among all the animals, none was found to be a fitting companion for Adam. Not one of them could share his thoughts, or answer him, or walk beside him as an equal. Then God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone." And he formed a woman, Eve, to walk beside Adam, as his equal and his companion. The story describes this moment gently. God caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep, so deep that he felt nothing at all. And while he slept, formed Eve from his own side, so that she would be neither above him nor beneath him, but beside him, matched to him exactly, close to his own heart. When Adam saw her for the first time, he spoke the first recorded words of poetry in the storm. "This, at last, is bone of my bone, and flesh of my flesh," he said. "She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." It is for this reason, the story tells us, that a man leaves his father and mother, and is united to his wife, and the two become one. A quiet foundation, laid down here at the very beginning, for every marriage that would follow. Adam had not even asked for a companion. It was God who first noticed the quiet gap in an otherwise complete world, and moved gently to fill it. The two of them lived in the garden without shame and without fear. They walked with God in the cool of the day, in the kind of closeness that needs no explanation, only presence. The man and his wife were both naked. The story says simply, and felt no shame at all. Nothing hidden, nothing guarded, nothing to protect themselves from. Try, for a moment tonight, to imagine what that particular kind of evening felt like. No rehearsed conversation, no careful editing of the day's events before sharing them. Simply presence, meeting presence, the way you might long on your hardest days now to be fully known by someone, without fear of what they might find. It can be difficult, from where we sit tonight, to imagine a world with no hiding in it at all. No half-truths, no folded arms, no quiet distance kept between one person and another. But that, for a little while, was simply how things were. Everything Adam and Eve needed was already close at hand. Food grew freely around them. Work felt more like partnership than burden. And each evening, it seems, they could expect the sound of God's own presence drawing near, the way a friend might arrive at the end of a long day. Into this peace came a quiet voice. A serpent, more crafty than any other creature God had made, approached Eve and asked her a question. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? It was not an honest question. It was a small twisting of what God had actually said, planting a seed of doubt before Eve had even finished considering it. God had, after all, given them nearly every tree in the garden freely, holding back only one. Eve answered honestly. God had given them nearly everything. Only the one tree was forbidden, and even that was for their own good, so that they would not die. She even added a small detail of her own, that they must not even touch it, as though the danger had grown slightly larger in her own mind than it had first been spoken. But the serpent suggested something else. "You will not certainly die," he said. Perhaps God was holding something back. Perhaps the fruit would open their eyes and make them wise, like God himself, knowing both good and evil. The first sin did not begin with hunger. It began with distrust, the quiet suspicion that God was holding back something good, that his instructions were not protection, but restriction. So many of our own worries, even now, a quiet suspicion whispered gently that what we already have is not quite enough, and that something forbidden might complete us where God has not. Notice, too, how quiet and unhurried this temptation was. There was no thunder, no dramatic struggle, only a conversation, calm and reasonable, sounding that slowly turned a clear boundary into something that seemed worth questioning after all. Eve looked at the fruit. It was pleasing to see, and it seemed desirable for gaining wisdom. She took it, ate it, and gave some to Adam, who was with her, and he ate as well, without any recorded protest, standing quietly at her side the entire time. In that same moment, something changed. Their eyes were opened, but not in the way the serpent had promised. Instead of wisdom, they felt shame. They noticed, for the first time, that they were unclothed, and they covered themselves with fig leaves, sewn together quickly, imperfectly, a first attempt at hiding something that had never before needed hiding. When they heard the sound of God walking in the garden, in the cool of the day, they did not run toward him, as they always had before. They hid among the trees, afraid of the one who had only ever been kind to them. God called out, "Where are you?" Not because he did not know, but because he was giving Adam the chance to come out of hiding. And to be honest, the same invitation he quietly extends to us, whenever we find ourselves hiding from him. Adam admitted his fear and his shame, and slowly the truth came out. The blame passed quickly, from Adam to Eve, from Eve to the serpent. Something had broken, not only between them and God, but between each other as well. A fracture that would echo through every family that followed theirs. And even while Adam and Eve hid, God came looking for them. There were real consequences that day. The serpent was cursed, set apart from every other creature, and told that one day a descendant of the woman would crush its head. Even as it struck at his heel, a small, quiet promise of hope, tucked into the middle of the judgment itself. Eve was told that pain would now accompany childbirth, and that her relationship with Adam would carry new strength, a tension that would echo down through every generation of marriages that followed. Adam was told that work would now come with hardship. The ground itself would resist him, growing thorns and thistles as easily as it grew grain. And he would labor by the sweat of his brow for the rest of his life, until he returned to the ground he had come from. Dust returning quietly to dust. And Adam and Eve would leave the garden, no longer able to remain in that first unbroken closeness with God. A guard was placed at the entrance, a cherubim with a flaming sword, turning back and forth in every direction, so that they could not return to the tree of life in this broken condition. But even here, mercy was already present. Before sending them out, God clothed them himself with garments of skin to cover their shame more completely than the leaves they had gathered on their own. Even in judgment, God's hands were still gentle. He did not simply send Adam and Eve away, exposed and ashamed, into a harder world. He first knelt down, in a manner of speaking, and clothed them himself, before they took a single step outside the garden. Adam gave his wife a name that night, or perhaps a little after, calling her Eve, because she would become the mother of all the living. A small note of ongoing hope, spoken quietly, even in the middle of loss. This first chapter of human struggle does not end with God turning away from Adam and Eve. It ends with God still speaking to them, still naming futures for them, still providing for their most basic need before they had even asked for it. Judgment and tenderness held together in the very same breath. Outside the garden, life continued. Children were born, the earth was cultivated, and yet the brokenness that began in Eden soon entered the next generation. Quietly, the way brokenness so often travels from one generation into the next, carried without anyone quite intending to carry it. Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain, who worked the soil, and Abel, who kept flocks of sheep. Each grew into the shape of his own quiet labor, one among crops, the other among animals, both continuing the work their father had been given in the garden. In time, each brother brought an offering to God. Cain brought some of the fruit of the ground, Abel brought the best portions of the firstborn of his flock, choosing generously from what he had, rather than simply what was easiest to spare. God looked with favor on Abel's offering, but not on Cain's. The reason is not explained in great detail. Only that Abel's offering came from the very best he had, given freely and fully, while Cain's did not carry that same wholehearted care. It was never really about crops versus animals. It was about the heart behind the giving. Cain became angry, and his face fell. It is a small, very human detail, easy to recognize even now. The particular sting of watching someone else receive what we quietly wanted for ourselves, and the way that sting can curdle quickly into resentment if left unattended. God did not immediately explain, in detail, why one offering was accepted and the other was not. Instead, he turned his attention to Cain's heart, to the anger already rising there, as if the offering itself mattered less in that moment than what Cain chose to do with his disappointment. God spoke gently to him, warning him before anything worse could happen. "Why are you angry?" God asked. "Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Sin is crouching at the door," God said. "It desires to have you, but you must master it." The choice was still Cain's to make. Nothing had happened yet that could not be turned back from. God's warning was not a punishment, but an open door, an invitation to step back before anything irreversible occurred. But resentment had already taken root in his heart, and he did not turn away from it. The image God used here lingers. Sin crouching at the door, like a wild animal waiting patiently for its moment. Not something that overwhelms a person suddenly, from nowhere, but something that waits and watches for the small opening a person's own heart provides it. Then notice the timing. God's warning to Cain came before the tragedy, not after it. At the very edge of humanity's next great failure, God's first move was still gentle instruction, offered in time to change course. One day, Cain invited his brother out into the field. And there, in a moment, the story does not linger on, choosing to hold this part gently rather than describe it in detail. Cain rose up against Abel and killed him. Afterward, God asked Cain a simple question. "Where is your brother, Abel?" And Cain answered with a question of his own, one that has echoed through every generation since, spoken by every person who has ever tried to distance themselves from someone else's well-being. "Am I my brother's keeper?" God already knew what had happened. Abel's blood, he said, was crying out from the ground. Cain would be driven from the land he had worked, and would wander as a fugitive for the rest of his life, no longer able to grow food from soil that would no longer yield its strength to him. Cain feared for his own safety, certain that others would seek to kill him in return, and said his punishment was more than he could bear. But even here, judgment came wrapped in mercy. God placed a mark on Cain, protecting him, so that no one who found him would take his life. It is a strange kind of grace, offered even to a man who had done something terrible. Justice was not ignored. Cain still had to leave his home and carry the weight of what he had done, a weight that would follow him for the rest of his life, wherever he eventually settled. But neither was Cain, abandoned completely. Even at humanity's very worst moment so far, God's first instinct was still protection, not abandonment. Even Cain, marked by violence, was not left utterly alone. Whatever we have done, that same instinct toward mercy has not changed. Cain went out from God's presence and settled in a land east of Eden called Nod, a name that simply means wandering, a fitting home for a man now sentenced to a restless life. In time, he built a city there and named it after his son Enoch, and his family line continued for several generations after him, filling the earth slowly with both talent and trouble in equal measure. Among Cain's descendants was a man named Lamech, who took the old pattern of violence even further, boasting openly to his wives about a man he had killed, and claiming for himself a vengeance far greater than the protection once given to Cain. If Cain is avenged 7 times, Lamech said, then I will be avenged 77 times. It is a quiet, sobering picture of how quickly a small wrong, left unaddressed, can grow into something much larger a few generations later, each generation inheriting a little more of what the one before it left unresolved, even within Cain's own family line, though there were quieter notes. His descendants are remembered for their skill, one for herding livestock, one for music played on the harp and the flute, and one for working bronze and iron. Even in a family shaped by violence, ordinary human gifts continue to appear, unwilling, it seems, to disappear completely. It is a strange comfort in its own way to notice this. Even the family line most closely marked by that first act of violence still produced music and craftsmanship and the quiet rhythms of ordinary work. Whatever else was broken, the image of God carried within each person had not been entirely erased. Adam and Eve, meanwhile, were given another son, Seth, to walk in Abel's place. A quiet continuation of the family line God had chosen to bless. It was around this time, the story tells us gently, that people first began to call on the name of the Lord, gathering, however imperfectly, to remember him together. Through Seth's own family line, generation followed generation, name after quiet name, each living for many long years and having sons and daughters of their own. Among them was a man named Enoch, remembered for something none of the others were. Enoch walked faithfully with God. The story tells us simply, and then he was not, because God took him away. Unlike every other name in that long, quiet list, Enoch's story does not end with the word died. It is a small, mysterious detail, easy to miss among so many long, unfamiliar names. Perhaps it is an early sign that walking closely with God was never entirely bound by the ordinary shape of a human life. The family of Adam continued to grow, but so did human violence. Generations passed, cities were built, and the earth became increasingly troubled, even as, quietly, in certain homes, people continued calling out to God, holding on to some small thread of the closeness that had once been lost in the garden. If your mind has already begun to drift, that is perfectly all right. Let your breathing continue slowing, a little more with every few sentences. There is nothing tonight that requires your full attention. The story will carry itself forward, gently, whether you follow every word or not. 10 quiet generations had passed since Adam, each one recorded briefly. A name, sometimes remarkably long by our own measure. And then the next name after it. Noah was born into this long line, the son of a man named Lamech, who hoped, when he named him, that his son would bring comfort in the midst of painful, difficult labor. As the years passed, the wickedness of humanity grew great upon the earth. Every inclination of the human heart had turned toward evil, and God's grief over what his creation had become was real and deep. The world God had once called very good had become, over many generations, a place of violence and corruption. It grieved him to his heart. The story says that he had made humanity at all, and his sorrow over this is described with unusual tenderness, more like the grief of a parent than the anger of a judge. Generations had passed since Cain and Abel, and since Seth, and the earth was now filled with people who no longer remembered, or no longer cared to remember, the God who had made them. It was not a single dramatic collapse, but a slow generational drift, the kind that can be difficult to notice while it is happening, and impossible to miss once enough time has passed. The story tells us, briefly and mysteriously, that human wickedness had grown so widespread that even the boundary between heaven and earth seemed to blur. In ways this old book does not fully explain to us, it is one of the more puzzling passages in Genesis, and we will hold it loosely tonight, simply as one more sign of just how far the world had drifted from what it was created to be. Yet in the middle of this troubled world, one man stood apart. Noah walked faithfully with God in a generation that had largely forgotten him. He was, the story tells us simply, a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, a quiet exception in a world that had grown loud with wrongdoing. God told Noah what was coming, to bring an end to the violence that had spread across it. But Noah and his family would be kept safe, held apart from the judgment that was coming for everyone else. God gave Noah careful instructions. Build an ark, a great vessel of wood, wide enough and tall enough to carry his family, and 2 of every kind of living creature, male and female, safely through the coming flood. The measurements were precise and enormous, far larger than any boat Noah or his neighbors had ever seen or imagined. The ark was enormous, far larger than anything Noah's neighbors had ever seen built. 3 levels, with rooms throughout, sealed with pitch inside and out, with a single door in its side, and 1 small window near the top to let in light and air. By later measurements, it would have stretched longer than a football field, and stood as tall as a 4-story building, an almost unimaginable structure to be raised by one family, with no machinery beyond simple tools and steady hands. Every plank had to be cut and shaped and fitted carefully into place, one at a time, long before there was any visible reason for such caution. Coated inside and out with pitch to keep the wood watertight against a storm. None of them had ever seen before. Noah's sons, Shem, and Japheth, worked alongside him, year after year, raising something the whole surrounding world must have found difficult to understand. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. It took years of steady, unglamorous work. Long before there was any sign of rain, we can only imagine what his neighbors must have said, watching him build something so strange under a clear and rainless sky, season after season, year after patient year. Some old traditions suggest Noah spent as much as a century on this work, though the story itself does not linger on the exact number of years. What it does linger on, quietly, is Noah's obedience. He did all that God commanded him, no more and no less, repeated almost like a refrain across these opening verses, a steady echo of faithfulness in the middle of a world that had largely stopped listening. There is something quietly admirable in that patience. Noah was not building for a storm he could already see on the horizon. He was building faithfully for something he could not yet see at all, simply because God had said it was coming. It is, perhaps, one of the quietest and longest acts of trust in the entire book. Alongside the animals, Noah gathered every kind of food that would be needed, storing it carefully throughout the ark, enough to sustain his family and every creature with them through however long the waters remained. It must have taken as much careful planning as the building itself. Room after room prepared quietly in advance for a season none of them could yet measure. When the ark was finished, Noah's family entered, along with the animals God had sent to them, pair by pair, kind by kind, filling the great wooden rooms with quiet, breathing life. 7 pairs of every clean animal, and 1 pair of every other kind came to Noah of their own accord, gathered by God's own quiet hand. And then the door was shut behind them, not by Noah's own hand, but by the Lord himself. The ark was not a symbol of Noah's strength. It was a sign of God's mercy, a place of safety prepared before the storm arrived, offered freely to anyone willing to step inside it. The rain began to fall, and the waters rose. Higher and higher they climbed, until even the highest mountains were covered, and the world Noah had known disappeared beneath the flood. You may notice tonight and in nights still to come how often the number 40 appears throughout this old book and throughout the rest of Scripture as well. 40 days of rain here. Later, 40 years of wandering and 40 days of testing in a wilderness. It seems to mark, again and again, a long season of waiting that eventually gives way to something new. For 40 days and 40 nights. And then, for many quiet months after that, the ark rested on the water. Above the sound of gentle rain against its wooden walls, the small family waited, safe within, while the world outside was made new. Inside that ark, in the middle of the greatest storm the world had ever known, life went on quietly. Meals were shared. Animals were tended. The family slept and woke and slept again, held safe by walls of wood and pitch, while rain fell steadily outside. It is not so different, perhaps, from where you are resting right now. Rain against a window, a quiet room, walls that hold, while something larger moves outside them. Whatever storm you may be carrying tonight in your own life, you too are held inside walls that were prepared with care. We are not told very much about what Noah's family said to one another during those long months, but we can imagine the quiet comfort of routine continuing even there. Someone checking on the animals each morning, someone else preparing whatever food remained. Small, ordinary tasks, carried out faithfully, even while the entire world outside had been swept away. There must have been long stretches of silence, too, broken only by the sound of water against the hull and rain against the roof above them, the same steady, patient sound that so many people now fall asleep to on quieter nights than that one. God did not forget Noah or any of the living creatures with him in the ark, and sent a wind to sweep across the earth, and the waters, which had covered the earth for 150 days, finally began to recede. Slowly, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, and slowly, the tops of other mountains began to appear above the water's surface once more, dark peaks emerging gradually from a world made entirely of water. Noah sent out a raven first, a bird capable of resting on floating debris and feeding on whatever it could find. And it simply flew back and forth, until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove, a gentler bird, one that would only rest on solid, dry ground, to see whether dry land had appeared anywhere nearby. The dove returned the first time, finding nowhere to rest its feet, and Noah gently drew it back inside, reaching out his hand to bring it safely through the window. The second time, 7 days later, the dove came back carrying a fresh olive leaf, a small and quiet sign that life was beginning again on the earth, that somewhere, not far away, green and growing things had already returned. Noah waited 7 more patient days and sent the dove out a third time. This time, it did not return at all. By this point, more than a full year had passed since the rain first began to fall. An entire cycle of seasons lived out quietly within those wooden walls. Finally, God told Noah it was time to leave the ark. Noah's family, and every creature with them, stepped out onto solid ground once more, into a world washed quiet and new, the air itself feeling different than it had before, cleaner, and somehow larger. We can imagine the particular quality of that first morning outside the ark. Ground beneath their feet again, after so long afloat. Space to walk further than a few wooden rooms would allow. And above them, for the first time in over a year, an open sky, rinsed clean, stretching out in every direction. Noah built an altar and gave thanks to God, offering some of every clean animal upon it. The very first act of worship recorded in this new, washed, clean world. And God made a covenant with him, and with every living creature. Never again would a flood destroy all life on the earth, no matter how deeply humanity's heart continued to struggle. As a sign of that promise, God set his rainbow in the clouds, a quiet reminder, stretched gently across the sky, of a promise kept even in the midst of storms. Whenever the rain falls now, and the bow appears afterward, it stands as a quiet echo of that same ancient promise, offered freely to every generation since, including the rain, falling gently outside your own window tonight. Alongside the rainbow, God gave Noah's family a fresh blessing, almost identical to the very first blessing spoken over Adam and Eve. Be fruitful, he told them, and multiply, and fill the earth once more. It was, in its own quiet way, a second beginning offered to a world that had just been washed clean. A fresh page laid gently over one that had been torn nearly beyond repair. God also gave the new world a few careful boundaries, gentler guardrails, for a humanity still prone to the same old struggles. Every living creature would now be given to them for food, alongside the plants they had always eaten, though they were told to treat the life within each creature with a certain reverence, and never to take a life carelessly. And whoever takes a human life, God said, will answer for that life. For humanity alone was made in God's own image. It was a quiet reminder, spoken to a world still recovering from violence, that every single person carries a worth that cannot simply be taken without consequence. This new beginning echoes the very first one. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth. The same words, spoken once in a garden, are spoken again here, on solid ground, still drying from the flood, as if God were willing, patiently, to begin again with humanity, as many times as it took. Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, went on to have families of their own, and from them, the story tells us, the whole earth was gradually repopulated once more, spreading outward in every direction, filling the emptied world with life again, tribe by tribe, and family by family. The waters receded, and the earth became quiet again. Yet even after such a great beginning, humanity's deeper problem remained within the human heart, waiting quietly to surface again in the next part of the story. After the flood, Noah's descendants spread slowly across the earth. For a long while, they shared one language and one set of words, and could understand one another easily wherever they happened to travel. As they journeyed eastward, they came to a wide, fertile plain in the land of Shinar, and settled there together, finding the ground good and the location convenient for a growing and increasingly ambitious people. Among Noah's descendants at this time was a man named Nimrod, remembered as a mighty hunter and the ruler of several great cities, including Babel itself. It was in the shadow of ambitious men like Nimrod that the idea for this tower likely first took shape, a monument fitting for a world eager to prove its own strength. And it was there that they began to make plans of their own. "Come," they said to one another, "let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar, building with the best materials they had, determined to leave something permanent behind them, something that would outlast every one of them individually. "Let us build a great city," they said, "and a tower that reaches to the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, so that we will not be scattered across the whole earth." A fear that, in the end, would arrive regardless of anything they built to prevent it. Babel was not merely about a tall building. It was about humanity, trying to create unity, security, and greatness without God, reaching upward toward the heavens, using nothing but bricks and ambition and their own gathered strength. How familiar this impulse still feels. The desire to build something so large, so impressive, that we no longer need to depend on anyone beyond ourselves. Babel was simply this very old desire, given brick and mortar for the first time, a monument built less to reach heaven than to avoid needing it. There is nothing wrong, on its own, with building, or achieving, or wanting to leave something behind. What made Babel different was its posture. Everything was aimed inward, toward their own name, their own safety, their own reputation, with no room left in the plan for God at all. Not whether we build, but why, and for whom. Babel's tower was never finished, and yet its builders were not left without a future. They were simply given a different one, scattered gently across a wider world than the single valley they had tried to hold on to. God saw the city and the tower being built. And he saw, too, the pride quietly growing beneath the bricks and mortar. The same old temptation that had first appeared in the garden, dressed now in a different shape, wearing the clothing of architecture and ambition instead of fruit. If as one people speaking one language they have begun to do this, God said, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. So he confused their language so that they could no longer understand one another. Mid-conversation, mid-instruction, mid-plan, work on the tower stopped, because the people could no longer work together as they had before. Simple instructions became confusing. A request for more bricks might be met with a blank stare. Shared plans fell apart, quietly, one misunderstood sentence at a time. Tools were set down halfway through tasks that no one could finish alone anymore. In a city that gave itself the name Babel, meaning confusion, a quiet, permanent reminder of what had happened there. And from that place, they scattered across the face of the whole earth, just as they had feared. It is a strange kind of story, an attempt to avoid being scattered, that ended in exactly that. The very thing they built the tower to prevent became, instead, the outcome of building it. The tower itself was left unfinished, a quiet monument to a plan that could not hold together on its own strength. But even here, scattering was not the end of God's care for the world. It was, in its own quiet way, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The nations that spread out from Babel would go on to fill the earth, each carrying its own language, its own customs, its own quiet distance from one another, forming the wide and varied world we still recognize today. From this point forward, the story of Genesis narrows its focus. The families who scattered from Babel would eventually become the many nations of the earth. But the story itself turns quietly toward one household within all of them, as if God, having watched humanity scatter, chose to begin gathering again, one family at a time, one quiet promise at a time. The very next family we meet after this scattering will be given a promise that runs in exactly the opposite direction, where Babel tried to gather glory for itself and ended in scattering. This next family would be scattered from their homeland, quietly, on purpose, and through them. In time, God would begin gathering the nations back together again. Before we leave this scattering behind, consider just how far it reached. Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became, in time, the ancestors of every nation the ancient world knew by name, spreading east and west and south into lands that would one day be called by many different names. Out of this wide, scattered family of nations, one small branch, descending quietly through Shem, would soon carry a promise meant to reach every single one of them again. Humanity had scattered across the earth. Then, in the middle of an ordinary family, in an ordinary city, God spoke to one man named Abram. This is one of the most important chapters in Genesis. God's answer to the scattering at Babel began not with an empire, but with a promise to one family. God spoke to a man named Abram, living in a distant land called Ur of the Chaldeans, and later in the city of Haran, and asked him to leave everything familiar behind. Leave your country, leave your people and your father's household, and go to a land I will show you. Abram did not know exactly where this journey would lead. God had not yet named the destination. He had only offered a promise, and asked Abram to trust him one step at a time, without the comfort of a map, or a plan, or even a name for where he was going. I will make you into a great nation, God said. I will bless you and make your name great, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever treats you with contempt, I will curse. And through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That last line deserves a moment tonight. Not a promise only for Abram, and not only for his descendants after him, but a promise reaching outward, eventually, toward every family on earth gathering back together. In a sense, everything Babel had scattered apart. Abram was already an old man by the standards of starting over, 75 years old, when he finally set out, and his life up to this point, had been thoroughly ordinary. He was not a young adventurer looking for a cause. He was a settled man, well into the second half of his life, with a household and a routine, and every reasonable excuse to simply stay where he was. God's call did not wait for a more convenient season. It simply came, and Abram, remarkably, went. He gathered his household, his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and everything they owned, and set out toward a land he had never seen, leaving behind whatever comfort came from familiar streets and familiar faces. They traveled through the land of Canaan, stopping here and there to build altars and to call on the name of the Lord, marking their slow, uncertain journey with small acts of worship along the way, as if each altar were a quiet way of saying, "We are still trusting you one more day." For a time, a severe famine forced Abram further still, simply to find enough food to survive. It was a difficult season, and Abram's fear got the better of him there, leading him into a moment of deception he was not proud of. Even so, God protected him and brought him safely back out of Egypt and back toward the land of the promise, carrying more than he had when he left. As Abram and Lot traveled, their households grew large, with many flocks and herds between them. Eventually, the land could no longer support both families living so closely together, and conflict arose between their herdsmen, each group competing for the same limited water and pasture. Rather than compete for the best land, wary of letting this new tension turn into open conflict between two households that were still, after all, family, Abram offered Lot the first choice. "Let there be no quarreling between us," Abram said, "for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? If you go left, I will go right. If you go right, I will go left." It was, in its way, a remarkable offer. Abram was the elder, and could easily have claimed first choice for himself. Instead, he let go of that right, trusting that God's earlier promise did not depend on him securing the best portion of land through his own effort. Lot looked out over the land and chose the well-watered plain near the Jordan, rich and inviting to the eye, near the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abram remained in Canaan, the harder, less immediately promising land, watching his nephew's chosen valley disappear slowly into the distance. It is a quiet picture of trust, laying down what looks safest, and letting God provide instead of grasping for the best portion first. After Lot departed, God spoke to Abram again, promising him all the land he could see, in every direction, for as far as his eyes could travel, and descendants as numerous as the dust of the earth. "Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land," God told him, "for I am giving it all to you." Abram moved his tents and settled near the great trees of Mamre, and built an altar there to the Lord, continuing the same quiet rhythm of worship that had marked his journey from the very beginning. Not long after this, a coalition of distant kings swept through the region, raiding the cities of the plain, including Sodom, and carrying off both the people and the goods they found there. Cities that had rebelled after years of paying tribute to these same distant rulers. Among those taken captive was Lot, along with everything he owned. When word reached Abram that his nephew had been captured, he did not hesitate. He armed the trained men born into his own household, 318 of them, and pursued the raiding kings deep into the night, far to the north of where he lived. Abram divided his men, and attacked under cover of darkness and routed the much larger force, chasing them for miles beyond Damascus, recovering Lot and his household, and all the plundered goods, and every captive who had been carried away. It was a remarkable victory for a shepherd with no real army, achieved, it seems, more through boldness and surprise than through numbers. On his way home, Abram was met by a mysterious figure, Melchizedek, king of the city of Salem, and also, the story tells us, a priest of God Most High. Melchizedek brought out bread and wine, and blessed Abram, praising God for delivering his enemies into his hand. Very little else is told to us about this king and priest, appearing here so briefly, and then disappearing again just as quickly from the story. And yet later generations, reading this same passage, would find his brief appearance worth returning to again and again. A quiet, early picture of a priesthood that belonged to God alone, older even than Abraham's own family line. Abram, in response, gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything he had recovered, a quiet gesture of gratitude toward a king he had never met before, and would likely never meet again. The king of Sodom offered to let Abram keep the goods for himself, but Abram refused, raising his hand and swearing an oath, unwilling to let anyone say that a foreign king, rather than God, had made him wealthy. "I will accept nothing belonging to you," he said, "not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.'" It is a brief, unusual episode, easy to pass over quickly, and yet it shows us something quietly important about Abram. His courage was not reserved only for matters of personal promise. When his family was endangered, he acted decisively, and when victory came, he gave credit and thanks to God alone. As the years passed, Abram grew troubled. God had promised him descendants as numerous as the stars, yet he and Sarai remained childless, and time continued to move forward without any sign of that promise taking shape. Abram voiced his doubt honestly to God, unafraid to bring his confusion directly to the one who had made the promise in the first place. "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me?" he asked. "Since I remain childless," it seemed, from where Abram stood, that a servant born in his household, a man named Eliezer, might become his only heir. After all, God brought Abram outside one night, beneath the open sky, away from his tent and his fears, into the cool, quiet dark, where thinking clearly again was finally possible. Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. "So shall your descendants be," God told him. And Abram believed God, trusting a promise he could not yet see fulfilled, and it was counted to him as righteousness. It is one of the quietest and most important sentences in the entire chapter. Not that Abram had earned anything, only that he had trusted. That night, God sealed the promise with a covenant, an ancient and solemn kind of agreement, confirming to Abram that this land and this future truly belonged to him and to his descendants after him, a promise not dependent on Abram's own strength to bring it about. The ceremony itself was solemn, following the custom of that ancient world. Abram prepared several animals and divided them, laying the pieces opposite each other. As the sun set and a deep sleep fell over him, a smoking firepot and a blazing torch passed silently between the pieces, a picture of God himself, alone, walking through the covenant and binding himself to the promise, without requiring Abram to walk through it beside him. It was God's own commitment, carried entirely on God's own shoulders. Before that vision ended, God also told Abram something sobering, that his descendants would spend 400 years as strangers in a foreign land, serving as slaves there, before finally being brought out with great possessions. Even the hardest parts of the family's future, it seems, were not hidden from Abram, but shared with him gently, alongside the promise of everything good still to come. Still, years passed without a child. Sarai, weary of waiting, suggested that Abram have a child through her servant, Hagar, according to the custom of the time, hoping perhaps to help God's promise along a little sooner than it seemed to be arriving on its own. Abram agreed, and Hagar conceived. Once she was pregnant, tension grew quickly between the two women. Hagar began to look on Sarai with contempt, and Sarai, hurt and humiliated, treated her harshly in return, until eventually Hagar fled into the wilderness, alone and afraid, with nowhere in particular to go. There, in the middle of nowhere, beside a spring of water, an angel of the Lord found her. He spoke gently to her, asked where she had come from and where she was going, and told her to return and submit to Sarai, difficult as that must have sounded, and gave her a promise of her own, that her son, too, would become a great people, too numerous to count. Hagar gave that place a name of her own. "You are the God who sees me," she said quietly, amazed that God had noticed her, alone in the wilderness, far from anyone else who might have cared what became of her. God sees the forgotten and afflicted, even far from Abram's household. Hagar was not invisible to him. She returned as he instructed her, and in time her son Ishmael was born. And Abram loved him dearly, delighting in him through the long years before Isaac's own birth, years in which Ishmael was, for a while, his only son. Years later, when Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him again and renewed his covenant with him. "Walk before me faithfully," God said, "and be blameless." As a sign of this promise, God gave him a new name. Abram, exalted father, became Abraham, father of many nations. Sarai, too, received a new name. She became Sarah, and God told Abraham plainly, "She will bear you a son, and I will bless her, and she will become the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Both names carry only the smallest of changes, a single letter added to each, and yet both changes point toward the same enormous shift. No longer simply Abram and Sarai, an ordinary couple growing old without an heir, but Abraham and Sarah, a father of many nations, and a mother of kings, even though, at the moment these names were given, neither title yet had any visible proof behind it. Alongside this new covenant, God gave Abraham a lasting sign to mark his family apart. A quiet, physical reminder, carried in the body of every son born into his household. A mark of belonging passed down through every generation that followed. Every male among them, including those born into his household as servants, was to receive this sign, a covenant carried quite literally in the flesh. Impossible to forget or misplace. Abraham, hearing this, fell face down and laughed quietly to himself. Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? He wondered. Will Sarah bear a child at 90? He even suggested, gently, that perhaps Ishmael alone might be enough. And yet, quietly, God assured him that this was exactly what he intended, and no less. Notice the timing here. This sign was given before Isaac ever existed, before the promise had visibly taken shape in any way at all. Abraham carried this mark of belonging through years that still looked, from the outside, exactly like childless waiting, trusting a promise his own body seemed to argue against. Not long after, 3 visitors came to Abraham's tent in the heat of the day. Abraham welcomed them warmly, offering food and rest, unaware at first of who they truly were, hurrying to prepare a meal with his own household, choosing his finest calf and the best flour he had, moving quickly, despite his age, to make his guests comfortable. He ran to greet them as they approached, bowed low to the ground, and offered water to wash their feet, and a place to rest beneath a nearby tree. The same unhurried hospitality that marked so much of his life, extended freely even to strangers who simply happened to be passing by. One of the visitors said that within a year, Sarah would have a son. Listening from inside the tent, laughed quietly to herself. She was far too old, she thought, for such a thing to be true, worn out now, and well past the years of childbearing. Is anything too hard for the Lord? The visitor asked. It was not a rebuke, but a gentle reminder. Sarah's laughter did not surprise God, and it did not change what he had promised, then or ever. Sarah's doubt was not hidden from God, and it was not punished harshly either. It was simply met with a quiet, patient question, inviting her to consider whether her own limitations were really the limit of what God could do. Before the visitors departed, they revealed that judgment was coming upon 2 cities nearby, Sodom and Gomorrah, because of their great wickedness, which had become impossible to overlook any longer. Abraham, thinking of his nephew Lot, who lived there, interceded on behalf of the cities, asking God to spare them if even a small number of righteous people could be found within them. He asked for 50, then 45, then 30, 20, and finally 10, each time growing a little bolder, and each time God agreed patiently to his request. Abraham did not simply accept the news of coming judgment. He drew near to God, respectfully but persistently, and asked, again and again, whether mercy might still be found. It is one of the clearest pictures in Genesis of what it looks like to intercede on behalf of someone else, to stand in the gap quietly on their behalf. In the end, not even 10 righteous people could be found. Lot and his family were led safely out before the judgment came, guided by the hand of angels sent to warn them, pulled gently along by the hand when they hesitated to leave, while the cities themselves were left behind. It is a story held gently here tonight, without dwelling on its darker details, a story of both justice and of mercy, extended to those who could still be reached. The angels gave Lot's family one simple instruction as they fled. Do not look back, and do not stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. Lot's wife, walking behind the others, glanced back toward the life she was leaving, and the story tells us, briefly and gently, that she did not complete the journey with the rest of her family. It is a quiet, sober note within an otherwise hopeful story, and we will not linger on it long tonight. Perhaps it is enough to notice that the instruction was simple, and that Lot's daughters and husband, who kept walking forward without looking back, arrived safely in the mountains beyond. At last, just as God had promised, Sarah gave birth to a son in her old age. At exactly the time God had said, exactly 1 full year after the visitors had first made their promise beneath the trees of Mamre. They named him Isaac, which means laughter, a name that carried both her earlier doubt and her later joy folded together into a single word, so that every time anyone spoke his name, it would quietly retell the whole story of how he came to be. God has brought me laughter, Sarah said, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. After so many years of waiting, the promise had finally taken the shape of a small, living child, held in his mother's arms. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born, and he did exactly as God had commanded him, marking his son as part of the covenant on the 8th day, the same quiet sign given earlier to Abraham himself, now passed to the child the promise had always been pointing toward. Some years later, at the celebration marking Isaac's weaning, Sarah noticed Ishmael, Hagar's son, mocking the younger boy, and old tensions between the two households rose to the surface once again. Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, since Ishmael was his son too, and he loved him. But God reassured him, telling him not to be troubled about the boy, and promising that Ishmael too would become a great nation, simply not the one carrying Abraham's central covenant forward. Early the next morning, Abraham gave Hagar bread and a skin of water, and sent her away with the boy. They wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba, and when the water was gone, Hagar placed her son under a bush and sat a short distance away, unable to bear watching him die of thirst. God heard the boy crying and called out to Hagar from heaven, asking what was troubling her and telling her not to be afraid. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water nearby that she had not noticed before. And she filled the skin and gave the boy a drink. It is the very same promise Hagar had received once before, years earlier, in a different wilderness. God sees the forgotten and afflicted, even when their own eyes, clouded by fear and exhaustion, cannot yet see the help that is already close beside them. Later, God tested Abraham in a way that must have felt impossibly difficult. Take your son, God said, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain. I will show you. Abraham obeyed, though the story does not tell us what he was feeling as he walked that road with his son beside him. For 3 long days, watching the mountain slowly grow closer with each passing mile. 3 days that must have felt, to a father in his position, unbearably long, and yet somehow not long enough. He rose early that first morning and saddled his donkey himself, and split the wood for the offering himself, as if he needed his hands to stay busy while his heart caught up with what he had been asked to do. He told the servants, who traveled partway with them, to wait behind. The boy and I will go over there. He said, we will worship, and then we will come back to you. It is a small, quiet sentence, easy to miss, and yet it carries something of Abraham's trust, even here. We will come back to you, spoken before he could have known exactly how that would be true. As they climbed the mountain together, Isaac asked a quiet question. Father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering? Abraham answered that God himself would provide the lamb, and the two of them walked on together. And at the final moment, as Abraham raised his hand, An angel of the Lord called out to stop him, and God provided a ram, caught nearby in a thicket, to take Isaac's place. The story ends not with Abraham providing the sacrifice, but with God providing what was needed. Abraham named that place, "The Lord will provide." And the promise to him was confirmed once more fully than ever before, sealed now by an act of trust that held nothing back. "Because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me," God told him, "I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. Because you have obeyed me." It is the fullest, most complete version of the promise yet given at the very moment Abraham's trust was tested most deeply. Abraham's life was not a story of perfect faith. It was a story of faith that grew through waiting, failure, fear, and repeated encounters with a faithful God. One uncertain step after another, across a lifetime that began with a single simple instruction to leave home. We are still only partway through this long, quiet story, and that is exactly as it should be. There is no need to hold on tightly to where we are. Let your shoulders settle a little further into the bed, and let the next part of the story arrive on its own time. In time, Sarah passed away at the age of 127 in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came to mourn for her and to weep, grieving deeply for his wife, purchasing a field and a cave in which to bury her, the first piece of the promised land he had ever formally owned. That same cave at Machpelah would later become a resting place for Abraham himself, and for Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah after him. A quiet thread of continuity running beneath this entire family story. As he grew older himself, Abraham turned his attention to finding a wife for his son, Isaac, now well into adulthood, and still unmarried. He called his oldest and most trusted servant, the one placed in charge of everything he owned, and made him swear a solemn promise. "You must not choose a wife for my son from the daughters of Canaan," Abraham said. "Instead, go to my own country and to my own relatives, and find a wife there for Isaac." Even if it meant a long and uncertain journey, and even if it meant the woman herself might refuse to come, the servant traveled a long distance with 10 camels loaded with gifts, and stopped to rest at a well outside the city of Nahor. In the cool of the evening, when the women came out to draw water, exactly the hour he had chosen with care, when the light was soft and the day's heat had finally begun to fade. It was a journey of several hundred miles, likely taking many weeks by camel, crossing unfamiliar country on behalf of a master too old now to make such a journey himself. The servant carried with him not only gifts, but the full weight of Abraham's trust, entrusted with choosing the woman who would carry the promise forward into its next generation. There, he prayed quietly for God's guidance in choosing the right woman. "Lord, God of my master Abraham," he began, "give me success today and show kindness to my master. Let it be," he asked, "that when I say to a young woman, 'Please let down your jar so I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I will water your camels too,' let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this," he said, "I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." Before he had even finished praying, a young woman named Rebekah arrived at the well. carrying her jar on her shoulder, very beautiful and still unmarried. She offered water not only to the servant, but to his camels as well, hurrying back and forth until every camel had drunk its fill. A task that could easily have taken a long while for 10 thirsty camels alone. A small, ordinary kindness that answered his prayer exactly, without her knowing she was being watched at all. The story never even tells us this servant's name, and yet he may be one of the quietest examples of faithfulness in the entire book. Entrusted with an impossible task, praying specifically and honestly, and giving God the credit the moment his prayer was answered, rather than claiming any of the credit for himself. The servant recognized God's hand at work and gave thanks quietly, watching in silence to see how things would unfold. He gave Rebekah gifts of gold, a nose ring and 2 bracelets, and asked whose daughter she was, and whether there might be room in her father's house for him to stay the night. It turned out that Rebekah was a close relative of Abraham's own family, the granddaughter of Abraham's own brother, exactly the kind of household Abraham had hoped his servant might find. Though neither of them had ever met her before, her family agreed to let her return with him to become Isaac's wife, once they too recognized that this had come from the Lord, and that it was not their place to stand in its way. The servant, once welcomed into the household, would not even sit down to eat until he had told them the whole story from beginning to end, eager to give a full account of God's guidance every step along the way. When he was finished, Rebekah's father and brother could only agree that the matter had clearly come from the Lord, and was not something for them to argue with. The next morning, Rebekah's family hesitated briefly, asking whether she might stay just 10 more days before leaving. The servant, mindful of Abraham waiting at home, asked not to be delayed any further. In the end, the decision was placed gently in Rebekah's own hands. "Will you go with this man?" they asked her. And it was then that she gave her simple, unhesitating answer, when Rebekah was asked directly whether she was willing to go. Right away, without waiting even a few more days as her family suggested, she answered simply, "I will go." 2 short words in her own language, spoken without hesitation, that quietly determined the entire direction of her life. It was a brave decision, made by a young woman leaving everything familiar behind, on the strength of a single conversation and a well full of water. Her family blessed her as she left. "May you increase to thousands upon thousands," they said, "and may your children possess the gates of their enemies." It was, without anyone fully realizing it yet, a blessing that echoed the very promise God had already given to Abraham, spoken now over the young woman who would help carry it forward. Rebekah traveled the long distance back with the servant, accompanied by her own nurse, Deborah, and by attendants who had cared for her since childhood, leaving behind everyone else she had ever known for the sake of a promise she had only just heard about, riding for many days across country that would have looked entirely foreign to her. There is a quiet courage in Rebekah's story. She did not simply inherit this family's promise by being born into it. She chose it deliberately, on the strength of one servant's testimony and one answered prayer beside a well. It is a small thing, offering water to a tired traveler and his camels at the end of a long day. Rebekah could not have known, in that ordinary moment, that an entire family's future was quietly turning on her simple willingness to help a stranger. Isaac, meanwhile, had gone out to walk in the field one evening. In quiet meditation, when he looked up and saw the camels approaching in the distance, dust rising slowly behind them. Rebekah, seeing him as well, climbed down from her camel to meet him and covered her face with a veil, as was the custom, meeting for the very first time the man she had agreed to marry on nothing more than a single conversation at a well. Isaac and Rebekah were married, and Isaac found comfort in her in the years following his mother's death. The promise passed quietly from one generation into the next, carried now by a young woman who had simply said yes to an unfamiliar road, the way Abraham himself had once said yes, so many years before, in an unfamiliar land of his own. Abraham himself lived on for many more years after this, and took another wife, Keturah, who bore him several more sons. But it was Isaac alone to whom Abraham gave everything he owned, sending his other children away eastward with gifts, while he was still living, careful to protect the inheritance and the promise that belonged uniquely to Isaac. Abraham died at the age of 175, an old man full of years, the story tells us, and was buried by both of his sons together, Isaac and Ishmael, standing side by side one final time, despite everything that had once separated their two households, in the cave at Machpelah, beside his beloved wife Sarah, closing a long and remarkable life that had begun with nothing more than a single instruction to leave home. For 20 years afterward, Isaac and Rebekah remained without children of their own, an echo of the same long waiting his own parents had once carried. Isaac prayed for his wife, and in time the Lord answered him, and Rebekah conceived the two sons, whose rivalry would shape the next long chapter of his family's story. Isaac's own life, quieter and less dramatic than his father's, spent mostly in one place rather than journeying widely as Abraham once had, carried echoes of it all the same. When a famine came to the land, Isaac was tempted to go down to Egypt, just as Abraham once had, but God told him to stay instead and renewed the same covenant with him directly. I will be with you and will bless you, God said, for through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed. The very same promise spoken now to the second generation. Isaac settled in Gerar among the Philistines, and, in an uncomfortable echo of his father's own failure, told the people there that Rebekah was his sister, afraid that her beauty might otherwise put his life in danger. King Abimelech eventually discovered the truth, having noticed Isaac caressing Rebekah through a window, and realizing at once that she could not possibly be merely his sister, much as an earlier king once had with Abraham. He released them both in peace, warning his own people not to harm either of them, on pain of death. This old fear repeated itself strangely closely, passed quietly from father to son. Even though Isaac had surely heard the story of his own parents' similar failure many times as a child, Isaac prospered greatly in that land, so much so that the Philistines grew envious and filled in the wells his father Abraham had once dug, stopping them up with earth to drive him away. Rather than fight for the land, Isaac simply moved on and quietly redug his father's wells, one after another, giving them the same names Abraham had once given them. At one well, his herdsmen quarreled with the local shepherds, and Isaac gave it a name, meaning dispute, and moved on rather than fight over it. At the next, the same thing happened, and he named it opposition and moved on again, twice choosing peace over ground he had every right to defend. Finally, at a third well, no one quarreled with him at all, and Isaac named it room, saying that the Lord had at last made room for them, and they would flourish in the land. It is a quiet, patient picture, easy to miss among the louder stories of this book. Isaac did not fight for every well. He simply kept digging, kept moving, kept trusting that there would eventually be room enough, without needing to take it forcefully from anyone else. The promise had passed from Abraham to Isaac. But in the next generation, the family would once again be shaped by rivalry, deception, and grace, the same tangled threads that seem to run quietly through every family, in every generation, including our own. However far into sleep you have already drifted, the story continues quietly here, ready for you whenever you happen to be listening. There is no part of this you need to hold onto tightly. Let it simply move past you like rain past a window. Isaac and Rebekah had twin sons, Esau and Jacob, born after their own long years of waiting for a child. Even before they were born, the two boys struggled together within her, so much so that Rebekah asked God what was happening inside her, troubled by the strange restlessness she felt. 2 nations are in your womb, God told her, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. A promise that would shape the rest of both boys' lives before either of them had taken a single breath. Esau was born first, red and covered with hair, and became a skilled hunter, at home in the open country, his father's favorite, perhaps because Isaac had a taste for the wild game Esau brought home. Jacob followed close behind, gripping his brother's heel as he was born, and grew into a quieter, more reflective young man, content to stay near the tents, close to his mother. As the older twin, Esau held the birthright, a position of honor and inheritance within the family, along with certain family leadership that would one day pass down through him, and a double share of whatever Isaac eventually left behind. But even this would not remain settled for long. Isaac, it seems, loved Esau for what he could offer, a taste for the game he hunted. Rebekah loved Jacob more simply, drawn to the son who stayed closer to home. It is a quiet, uncomfortable detail, but an honest one, and it would shape nearly everything that followed in his family. One day, Esau returned from hunting, exhausted and very hungry. Jacob, who had been cooking a pot of red stew, offered him a bowl in exchange for his birthright. "Quick," Esau said, "let me have some of that red stew, for I am famished." Esau, focused only on his hunger in that moment, said that his birthright was worth nothing to him if he died of hunger anyway, and agreed, trading away his future for a single meal. Later, as Isaac grew old, and his eyesight failed him almost completely, the time came for him to give his final blessing to his firstborn son. He asked Esau to hunt some wild game first, and prepare a tasty meal before receiving it, wanting one last familiar moment between them before he spoke the words. Rebekah, listening nearby and favoring Jacob, devised a plan to deceive her aging husband, while Esau was still out in the field. She dressed Jacob in Esau's clothing and covered his hands and neck with goatskins, so that he would feel to his father's blind hands, exactly like his hairy brother. Isaac, uncertain, felt his son's hands, and said the voice sounds like Jacob, but the hands feel like Esau, before finally accepting the meal set before him. Jacob disguised himself as Esau and received the blessing meant for his brother, a blessing of abundant harvests, of authority over his family, and of God's favor resting upon him. When Esau discovered what had happened, shortly afterward, arriving with his own carefully prepared meal, his grief and anger were overwhelming. "Bless me too, my father," Esau cried out, weeping loudly. But Isaac had nothing left to give him that had not already been spoken over Jacob. Esau vowed, quietly, that once his father had died, he would kill his brother, and Jacob was forced to flee for his life, sent away by his own mother for his own safety. It is not a comfortable story. Deception, favoritism, and family loyalty, all bent out of shape together. Each person reaching for something at someone else's expense. And yet, even in this tangled moment, God's promise did not disappear, and did not depend on any of them having handled it well. Alone and far from home, Jacob stopped for the night in the wilderness, using a stone for a pillow, with nothing else to comfort him but the open sky above. As he slept, he dreamed of a staircase reaching from earth to heaven, with angels of God moving up and down along it, quietly, purposefully, as if this had always been happening, unseen. At the top stood the Lord, who spoke to Jacob and renewed the same promise once given to his grandfather Abraham and to his father Isaac. The land beneath him would belong to his descendants, and through his family, all people on earth would be blessed. The same wide promise, now resting on the shoulders of a frightened young man running from his own brother. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, God told him, spreading out in every direction, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. God told him, I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. This promise arrives gently, not to a man at his best, but to a man in the middle of running away from the consequences of his own deception. It does not promise that Jacob's journey would be easy or short or free of further difficulty. Simply presence and eventual return, offered freely to a man who had, at that exact moment, absolutely nothing else to hold on to. Jacob woke and realized, almost with surprise, that God had been present in that place all along, even though he had not known it. Surely, the Lord is in this place, he said quietly, and I was not aware of it. How awesome is this place, he added. This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Even in our most uncertain, most wandering moments, running from mistakes we cannot undo, God is often nearer than we realize. Jacob set up the stone he had used as a pillow, anointed it with oil, and named that place Bethel, meaning the house of God. Jacob continued his journey, and arrived at the home of his uncle Laban, near a well where local shepherds gathered their flocks each day. There, he fell in love with Laban's younger daughter, Rachel, and agreed to work 7 years in exchange for her hand in marriage. Those 7 years, the story tells us, seemed to Jacob like only a few days, because of the love he had for her. But on the wedding night, in the darkness, Laban deceived Jacob, giving him his older daughter, Leah, instead. And Jacob did not realize the truth until morning. Jacob discovered the deception only the next morning, waking beside the wrong sister entirely, and confronted Laban, who claimed it was simply not their custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the elder. Jacob agreed to work another 7 years for Rachel as well, and within the same week, married her too, so that he now had 2 wives, each held closely by different loyalties within the same household. There is a quiet irony here. Jacob, who had once deceived his own father by pretending to be someone he was not, was now himself deceived in the dark by a father pretending one daughter was another. The very trick he had once used found its way back to him in a different shape within his own household. Over the years that followed, Jacob's family grew large through Leah and Rachel, and their 2 servants. 12 sons and 1 daughter were eventually born to him, one after another, becoming, in time, the 12 tribes of Israel, though none of them yet knew what their names would come to mean. Leah, aware that Jacob loved her sister more deeply than he loved her, named her first son Reuben, saying that the Lord had seen her misery. Her second son she named Simeon, because the Lord had heard that she was unloved. Her third she named Levi, hoping that now, at last, her husband would become attached to her. And her fourth son she named Judah, this time simply in praise, saying, "This time I will praise the Lord," as though something in her had settled quietly into gratitude, whether or not Jacob's heart ever fully turned toward her. Rachel, meanwhile, remained without children of her own for many years, watching her sister's family grow while her own arms stayed empty. "Give me children," she cried out to Jacob, "or I will die." It was not until much later that God remembered her and opened her womb, and she gave birth to a son she named Joseph, asking that the Lord would add to her yet one more. It is a quietly aching picture, if you let it settle for a moment tonight. 2 sisters sharing one husband, each measuring her own worth against the others, and God patiently working through the complicated, uneven love of this one household anyway. Jacob's flocks grew prosperous as well, through years of careful and patient work, even as his relationship with Laban grew increasingly strained, each man feeling that the other had taken more than his fair share along the way, his wages changing again and again at Laban's discretion, until Jacob eventually sensed it was time to move on quietly. Before the tension grew any worse, Jacob later reminded his wives, honestly, of everything those years had cost him. "This is how it has been for the 20 years I have been in your father's household," he told them. 14 years I worked for the 2 of you, and 6 more for the flocks. And your father changed my wages 10 times. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and sleep fled from my eyes. Yet, through all of it, quietly, his flocks and his family continued to grow. God's blessing following him, even through a household that never fully trusted him, and that he, in turn, never fully trusted either. When the day finally came to leave, Jacob gathered his entire household, his wives, his children, and his flocks, and set out toward home while Laban was away shearing sheep. Rachel, before they left, quietly took her father's household idols with her. Small figures kept for guidance and protection, the last uncertain thread still tying part of her heart to the household she was leaving behind, even as she stepped out toward a very different future. Laban pursued them for 7 days, and when he finally caught up, accused Jacob of stealing away in secret and of taking his gods. Jacob, unaware of what Rachel had done, allowed Laban to search the camp thoroughly. But Rachel hid the idols cleverly, and they were never found. The 2 men eventually made peace, setting up a heap of stones between them as a witness, and agreeing never to cross that boundary against one another again. "May the Lord keep watch between you and me," Laban said. "When we are away from each other, a strange, formal blessing between two men who had never fully trusted one another, and yet were parting, at last, without violence. 20 years of shared history, and no small amount of mistrust between them. Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren goodbye, blessed them, and returned home, leaving Jacob free, at last, to continue the long journey back toward the land of his father. Eventually, Jacob decided it was time to return to his own land and to face his brother Esau after so many years apart. He was deeply afraid of how Esau might receive him, and sent messengers ahead with gifts, hoping to soften whatever anger still remained after 2 decades. The messengers returned with troubling news. News that must have confirmed every fear Jacob had carried quietly for the past 20 years. Esau was coming to meet him, they said, with 400 men. Jacob, terrified, divided his household into 2 groups, hoping that if one were attacked, the other might still escape, and sent generous gifts of livestock ahead of him in waves, goats and ewes, and camels and cattle, hoping to soften his brother's heart before they even met face to face. Jacob prayed that night, honestly and openly, reminding God of his own promise to bring him home safely. Lord, he prayed, you who told me to go back to my country, and who has been faithful to me in ways I do not deserve. I am unworthy of all the kindness you have shown me, he admitted. I had only my staff when I crossed this river, and now I have become 2 camps. Deliver me, he asked, from the hand of my brother, for I am afraid he will come and attack us all, even the mothers with their children. He arranged his gifts carefully, sending each drove of animals ahead separately, with careful space between them, so that Esau would encounter kindness after kindness, wave after wave, long before he ever reached Jacob himself. The night before their reunion, Jacob sent his family across a river ahead of him, and was left alone on the far side, in the darkness, entirely by himself, for perhaps the first time in many years. There, a mysterious figure wrestled with him until daybreak. Neither could overpower the other, hour after hour, in the dark, straining against each other in near total silence, until at last the figure touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of joint. Let me go, the figure said, for it is daybreak. But Jacob refused, breathless and injured, and still holding on with everything he had left. I will not let you go unless you bless me, Jacob said, holding on even through the pain, refusing to release his grip even as morning began to break. By morning, Jacob received a new name, Israel, one who has struggled with God and with men, and has prevailed. Jacob had spent much of his life grasping for blessing, and then, in the dark, from this unknown figure by the river. But by the river, he learned that blessing was not something he could steal or wrestle away by strength alone. It had to be received quietly from a hand stronger than his own. Jacob named that place Peniel, meaning the face of God, saying that he had seen God face to face, and yet his life had been spared. He limped away from that riverbank as the sun rose behind him, carrying, from that morning onward, a permanent reminder in his own body of the night everything changed. When morning came, Jacob limped out ahead of his family, arranging his household carefully behind him, the servants and their children first, then Leah and her children, and finally Rachel and Joseph, placed last and furthest from any possible danger. He himself walked out in front of all of them, bowing low 7 times as he approached, his family following carefully behind him. And instead of the anger he had feared for 20 years, Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, threw his arms around his neck, and wept. The 2 brothers were reconciled, standing together in the open field where Jacob had feared that only violence was waiting. Esau, at first, tried gently to refuse the gift, insisting he already had plenty. But Jacob pressed him further. "No, please," he said. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Now that you have received me so favorably, please accept the gift I have brought you," Jacob said. "For God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And finally, Esau accepted his brother's offering. Esau offered to travel alongside Jacob's household for the rest of the journey. But Jacob, mindful of his young children and nursing flocks, gently suggested that Esau go on ahead, promising to follow at his own slower pace. The 2 brothers parted peacefully, Esau returning to the hill country of Seir, and Jacob continuing on towards Succoth, and then to Shechem, where he bought a plot of land, and pitched his tents at last, and built an altar there, calling it God, the God of Israel. Jacob returned home with a new name, Israel, given to him at a river crossing he would remember for the rest of his life, and a body that would carry a slight limp for the rest of his life. A quiet reminder of the night he wrestled with God, closing the long circle that had begun so many years earlier, with a stolen blessing and a frightened flight from home. And among his sons was a young man whose dreams would carry the family far from the promised land, all the way into Egypt itself. We are entering the final long story of Genesis now, the story of Joseph, which will carry us all the way to the end of this book. If you are still awake to hear it, welcome back. If you are already asleep, rest well. The story will keep unfolding quietly around you. Regardless, Jacob loved his son Joseph more than any of his other children, in part because Joseph was born to him in his old age, through his beloved wife Rachel. He gave Joseph a richly ornamented coat as a sign of that favor. His brothers, noticing this, grew resentful and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph's resentment from his brothers was not helped by 2 dreams he shared openly with his family, without seeming to notice how they might sound to brothers already inclined to dislike him. In the first, he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field, and his brother's sheaves bowed down to his own. In the second dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars all bowed down before him. Even his father Jacob, hearing this one, rebuked him gently, asking whether he truly expected his whole family, himself and Joseph's mother included, to bow before him one day, though the story tells us he kept the matter quietly in mind, turning it over in his thoughts long after the conversation had ended. His brother's jealousy deepened into something closer to hatred. Joseph was only 17 years old at this point, still young enough that sharing a dream so openly may simply have reflected a young man's excitement rather than any real arrogance. But timing and audience matter, and a household of older brothers already inclined to resent him were perhaps not the safest place to share such a dream. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending the flocks, some distance from home, near Shechem, and then further on toward Dothan. As he approached from a distance, still recognizable by his coat, His brothers saw him coming, and their resentment finally became action. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to one another. "Let us kill him and throw him into a pit, and we will see what becomes of his dreams then." Reuben, the oldest, and therefore the one who would answer most directly to their father for whatever happened, quietly convinced them to throw him into an empty pit instead, secretly hoping to rescue him later himself and return him safely to their father, once his brother's anger had cooled a little. "What good will it be," Judah said to his brothers, "if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." Rather than kill him outright, the brothers agreed and eventually sold Joseph, at Judah's suggestion, to a passing caravan of Ishmaelite traders bound for Egypt for 20 pieces of silver, while Reuben was elsewhere and returned too late to stop it. They dipped his richly ornamented coat in animal blood and brought it back to Jacob, letting him believe his beloved son had been torn apart by a wild animal. Jacob's grief was profound and lasting. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, refusing to be comforted by any of his children, saying he would go down to the grave, still mourning his son. Consider the weight of what Jacob's sons carried silently for so many years afterward. They watched their father grieve a death that had never actually happened, knowing the truth the entire time, and said nothing for decades, allowing the lie to settle deeper with every passing year. Meanwhile, his son was carried away into a foreign land, sold once more as a slave in the household of an Egyptian official named Potiphar, captain of Pharaoh's guard. Joseph served faithfully in Potiphar's household, and God's favor was evident in everything he did, so that he was placed in charge of the entire estate, trusted with everything Potiphar owned, down to the smallest detail, leaving Potiphar free to think of nothing at all except the food he ate. But Joseph was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, after refusing, day after day, to do wrong against his master's trust, insisting he could not sin against God in such a way, and could not betray a master who had trusted him with everything. "My master has withheld nothing from me except you," he told her plainly, "because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Though innocent, when she finally accused him publicly, holding on to a piece of his clothing as evidence, he was thrown into prison without any chance to defend himself. Even there, in a place meant to break a person's spirit, the story tells us something quietly remarkable. God was with Joseph and gave him favor even within the prison walls, so that the warden soon trusted him with responsibility there as well, much as Potiphar once had, handing him the daily care of the entire prison. By this point in his life, Joseph had already been torn from his home, soul of like property, and now imprisoned for a crime he never committed. Each new setting looked, from the outside, like another step downward. And yet, quietly, in each one, Joseph rose to responsibility again, as though something steady inside him simply could not be buried for long, regardless of the circumstances surrounding him. It would be easy to imagine Joseph growing bitter here, sold by his own family, and now punished for a wrong he never committed. The story does not tell us he never struggled. It simply tells us, quietly and repeatedly, that God remained with him in the pit, in Potiphar's house, and now in prison, present in every place Joseph had never chosen to be. While in prison, Joseph met two of Pharaoh's former officials, a cupbearer and a baker, each troubled by a strange dream on the same night. Their faces downcast the next morning. Joseph, trusting that interpretations belonged to God, offered to listen, noticing their sadness and asking why they looked so troubled. The cupbearer dreamed of a vine with 3 branches, budding, blossoming, and producing ripe grapes, which he pressed into Pharaoh's cup and placed into Pharaoh's own hand. Joseph told him that within 3 days, Pharaoh would restore him to his position, and asked only that he remember him once he was free, and mention his case to Pharaoh. The baker, encouraged by this good news, shared his own dream. 3 baskets of bread on his head, with birds eating from the top one, and nothing he could do to stop them. Joseph's interpretation of this dream carried sadder news, that within 3 days the baker would be executed. Do not interpretations belong to God? Joseph had told them both, before he ever heard the details of either dream, unwilling to take personal credit for a gift that was never truly his own. Both interpretations proved true, exactly as Joseph had said. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's own birthday, a day of feasting for the whole court, the same day, the cupbearer was lifted up, and the baker was not. Joseph had asked the cupbearer, before he left, to remember him once he was free, since he had done nothing to deserve his imprisonment. But the cupbearer forgot, and Joseph remained in prison for 2 more long years, quietly waiting once again, much as his own father had once waited so many years for a promised child. Eventually, Pharaoh himself had 2 troubling dreams in a single night. In the first, 7 healthy, well-fed cows came up from the Nile, only to be devoured by 7 starving, sickly ones that somehow remained just as thin as before. In the second, 7 full, healthy heads of grain were swallowed by 7 thin, withered ones, scorched by the east wind. No one in his court, none of the wise men or magicians of Egypt, could explain what the dreams meant, though Pharaoh's spirit was deeply troubled by them. At last, the cupbearer suddenly remembered Joseph and mentioned him to Pharaoh, admitting with some embarrassment that he had forgotten him for 2 full years. Joseph was brought quickly from the prison, shaved and given fresh clothes, and explained that the dreams foretold 7 years of great abundance across the land, followed by 7 years of severe famine, so severe that it would consume all memory of the plenty before it, and advised Pharaoh to find someone wise to prepare for it, storing up grain during the good years to survive the years still ahead. Joseph did not simply interpret the dream. He offered Pharaoh a careful plan as well, suggesting that a wise overseer be appointed to collect a portion of the harvest during each of the 7 good years, storing it safely in the cities, so that Egypt would have enough set aside once the famine finally arrived. Joseph moved naturally from interpretation to action. He did not simply deliver difficult news and step aside. He offered a solution alongside it, the same quiet competence that had already marked his years in Potiphar's household and in the prison, now finally given a stage large enough to matter for an entire nation. Since God has made all this known to you, Pharaoh said, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh, recognizing the wisdom in Joseph's words and sensing the Spirit of God within him, placed him in charge of preparing Egypt for what was coming, raising Joseph in a single day from forgotten prisoner to the second most powerful man in the land. Second only to Pharaoh himself. He was given Pharaoh's own signet ring, fine linen robes, and a gold chain, and was paraded through the city in a chariot, while attendants called out before him for the people to bow down. Pharaoh also gave Joseph a new Egyptian name, Zaphenath, Paneah, Asenath, by whom he had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, whose names quietly reflected all he had lost, and all he had since been given. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, saying that God had made him forget all his hardship and his father's household. And he named his second son Ephraim, saying that God had made him fruitful in the very land of his suffering. Just as Joseph had predicted, 7 years of abundance came, and Joseph oversaw the careful storage of grain in every city, more grain than could even be measured, until they stopped keeping records of it altogether, like trying to count the sand along the shore of the sea. Then, just as he had said, famine spread across the region, reaching even his father's household back in Canaan. And eventually, the entire known world came to Egypt to buy grain. The famine was severe everywhere. The story tells us plain, in every land, while Egypt alone had bread, because one man had listened carefully to a pair of dreams and had been given the wisdom and the years of warning to prepare. Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy grain, keeping only Benjamin, his youngest, safely at home, unwilling to risk losing Rachel's remaining son, unaware of who awaited them there. The brothers traveled to Egypt and bowed down before the powerful official in charge of the grain, faces to the ground, not recognizing their own brother after so many years. Egypt, by this time, was unlike anywhere Joseph's brothers had ever traveled before. Wide fields fed by the Nile's yearly flooding, great storehouses rising in every city, roads busier than anything in Canaan, filled now with travelers from every surrounding nation, all arriving for the same reason they had, all bowing before the same unfamiliar Egyptian official who controlled the only reliable grain left in the region. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately, even after so many years, though they did not recognize him at all, dressed now as an Egyptian official, speaking through an interpreter, his voice and manner utterly transformed by the years between them. Rather than reveal himself right away, he tested them gently, wanting to see whether their hearts had truly changed since the day they sold him. Speaking harshly through an interpreter so that his own voice would give nothing away, he accused them of being spies, come to see the weaknesses of the land, and held them under guard for 3 days while they waited to learn their fate, before eventually requiring that they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt to prove their honesty, keeping Simeon behind as a guarantee of their return. As they spoke among themselves, unaware Joseph could understand their language, they admitted their guilt over what they had done to him so long ago, remembering the sound of his pleading that they had ignored. "Surely we are being punished," they said quietly to one another, "because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, and we would not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." And Joseph turned away and wept. When the brothers returned home to Jacob, they discovered that the silver they had paid for the grain had somehow been returned inside their sacks, adding fear to fear, and making the whole strange journey feel even more unsettling than it already had. Jacob, hearing that Simeon had been kept behind, and that Benjamin was now being asked for as well, cried out that everything was against him, unaware of how close he actually was to seeing his lost son again. Eventually, on a second journey, with their father's reluctant blessing, Benjamin was brought to Egypt as well, and Joseph watched closely to see how his brothers would treat him, overwhelmed at the sight of his younger brother, and forced to leave the room briefly to weep in private, once again, before he could compose himself enough to continue the meal. Joseph arranged for a silver cup to be hidden in Benjamin's sack, and then sent his steward after them, accused them of theft, threatening to keep Benjamin as a slave, and to send the rest of the brothers home without him, watching carefully to see what they would do. At this, his brother Judah stepped forward and offered a long, heartfelt appeal. He reminded the Egyptian official, unknowingly his own brother, that their father had already lost one son years ago, and had said plainly that if anything happened to Benjamin, it would bring his gray hair down to the grave in sorrow. "Now therefore," Judah said, "please let your servant remain here as a slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I could not bear to see the misery that would come upon my father." Consider just how far Judah had come since the day he first suggested selling Joseph into slavery for a handful of silver. The same brother now offered his own freedom, without hesitation, to spare his father a second, unbearable loss. It was this moment, this evidence of real change in the same brothers who had once sold him without a second thought, that finally moved Joseph to reveal himself. He sent his Egyptian attendants out of the room and wept so loudly that the Egyptians outside could hear him. And even Pharaoh's own household heard the news. "I am Joseph," he told them, "whom you sold into Egypt." "Is my father still living?" he asked, before anyone could find the words to answer him. His brothers were terrified, certain he would seek revenge after everything they had done to him, and could not even answer him at first, standing in stunned and fearful silence, unable to look him in the eye. But Joseph offered them something else entirely. "Come close to me," he said gently, when no one moved to answer him, "and do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you, to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by this great deliverance." It had been over 20 years since that day in the field near Dothan, 2 decades of silence and guilt, and an old father who never stopped grieving. And in a single afternoon, in a foreign palace, all of it was finally, gently laid to rest. His brothers came close, as he had asked, and Joseph embraced Benjamin first, weeping on his neck, and then each of his other brothers in turn, kissing them and weeping over all of them, until at last, hesitant, they began to talk with him themselves. Joseph sent for his father, providing wagons and provisions for the entire journey, and told them not to quarrel on the road about what had happened. The whole family was brought to Egypt, 70 persons in all, reunited after so many years of grief and separation. Jacob, now called Israel, wept as he embraced his son, saying he could now die in peace, since he had seen Joseph's face again and knew that he was still alive. When Pharaoh met Jacob for the first time, he asked the old man his age, and Jacob answered that his years had been few and difficult compared to those of his fathers, a quiet, honest summary of a life that had carried far more struggle than comfort. Jacob lived out his final years in Egypt, surrounded by his sons and grandchildren, settled in the good land of Goshen, provided for at Pharaoh's own invitation, given the very best of the land to live in. Before all of this, when Jacob first heard that his son was still alive, he asked to see Joseph's 2 Egyptian-born sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. "I never expected to see your face again," Jacob told Joseph, "and now God has even let me see your children." Joseph brought the 2 boys close to his father, positioning the elder, Manasseh, toward Jacob's stronger right hand, and the younger, Ephraim, toward his left, following the expected order of things. But Jacob, old and nearly blind now himself, crossed his arms deliberately, placing his right hand on the younger son's head instead. Joseph, seeing this, tried gently to correct him, thinking his father's eyes had simply failed him in the dim light. "Not so, my father," he said. "This one is the firstborn." But Jacob refused to move his hands. "I know, my son, I know," he said quietly. "He too will become a people, and he too will become great. But his younger brother will be greater than he." It is a small, strange echo, easy to miss, of Jacob's own life. The same pattern that once shaped his own stolen blessing. The younger receiving what tradition would have given the elder, appeared once more here, at the very end of his life, though this time given openly and without any deception at all. Before he died, at the age of 147, Jacob gathered his sons around his bed and spoke a blessing over each of them individually, one at a time, entrusting the family's future once again into God's hands. Each blessing was different, shaped by the character and history of the son receiving it, some full of praise, and some carrying quiet correction for old mistakes, gathered up honestly, even at the very end of his life. To Reuben, his firstborn, Jacob spoke honestly, a reminder that being born first does not, on its own, guarantee anything. To Simeon and Levi, he spoke soberly of the anger they had once carried, unwilling to overlook the violence that had marked parts of their story. To Judah, in particular, Jacob spoke of a scepter that would not depart from his line, a small, quiet seed of a promise that would not fully bloom for many generations, still to come. And to Joseph, he spoke warmly of a fruitful vine, planted near a spring, its branches climbing over a wall, blessed by the God of his father in ways his brothers could hardly measure. Even this final blessing did not erase the family's complicated history. Jacob named old failures, honestly, alongside genuine hope, refusing to pretend that any of his sons had been perfect. And yet, the blessing was given all the same, to every one of them, imperfect as they were. He asked to be buried, not in Egypt, but back in Canaan, in the same cave where Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah had already been laid to rest, in the land God had promised so long before. And Joseph carried out this wish faithfully, accompanied by a great procession from Egypt, mourned along the way, even by the Egyptians who traveled with them. After their father's death, Joseph's brothers grew afraid once more. worried that he might finally take revenge now that Jacob was no longer there to keep the peace between them. They sent word to Joseph, asking his forgiveness once more, and even offered to become his slaves. But Joseph wept at their fear and reassured them gently, one final time. "You intended to harm me," he told them, "but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he spoke kindly to them and put their minds at ease. Joseph himself lived to see his own great-grandchildren. The story tells us, born on his knees, surrounded to the very end by the large, imperfect, deeply loved family, his forgiveness had helped hold together. In time, both Jacob and Joseph passed away. Joseph, even in his final words to his brothers, still trusted in the promise given long before to Abraham, that God would surely come to their aid and bring his family back to the land he had promised them, out of Egypt and into Canaan once more. Joseph asked that when that day came, his own bones would be carried up out of Egypt as well, carried by faith into a future he would not personally see. He was placed in a coffin in Egypt, and there, for now, our story comes to rest. Genesis begins with life entering the world, and it ends with a coffin in Egypt. Yet the final note is not despair, it is expectation. God's promise is still moving forward, even from inside a wooden box, carried quietly toward a future not yet arrived. It would be several hundred years before that promise moved forward again in any visible way. Several hundred years of ordinary life in Egypt, families growing, seasons passing, before the next great chapter of this story would begin. But that is a story for another night, another book, another quiet evening, much like this one, as our journey through Genesis comes to a gentle close tonight. 4 quiet threads run through everything we have heard. God creates. The world we live in has order and purpose, and human beings carry a dignity given by their Maker, not earned by their own effort. Nothing about your life tonight is an accident, any more than that first morning light was an accident. Sin broke what was once whole between people and God, between one person and another, and between humanity and the world itself. We saw it in a garden, and in a field between 2 brothers, and on a plain called Shinar, and in a family torn between favoritism and deceit. God makes promises, from Noah to Abraham, from Isaac to Jacob, and finally to Joseph. God did not abandon his creation. He kept working, kept promising, kept moving the story forward, one uncertain generation at a time, even when the people carrying that promise stumbled badly along the way. And God works through imperfect people. Every figure in Genesis was flawed in some way. Noah, after such great faithfulness, still had his weaknesses. Abraham doubted more than once and laughed at a promise before he believed it. Jacob deceived his own father and was deceived in turn. Joseph's brothers sold him out of jealousy and carried that guilt for decades. And yet, God's faithfulness never depended on their perfection. There is a 5th thread as well, running quietly beneath the other 4, and perhaps the one worth carrying most gently into sleep tonight. God redeems what is broken, Joseph said plainly to his brothers. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Not that the harm never happened, but that it did not have the final word. We saw this same quiet pattern again and again tonight, in smaller ways. A garden lost, but clothing still provided. A flood that ended a world, but a rainbow that promised a future. A stolen blessing, but reconciliation still. Decades later, in an open field, loss was never denied. It was simply never allowed to be the whole story. The people of Genesis were not flawless. They doubted, feared, deceived, struggled, and sometimes failed deeply, in ways that mirror our own failures more closely than we might like to admit. If we are honest with ourselves tonight, yet through every generation, God remained faithful. The God who brought light into darkness, who remembered Noah, who guided Abraham, who stayed with Jacob even by a riverbank in the dark, and who worked through Joseph's suffering to save an entire nation, is still the God who sees, remembers, and remains near. If your own story tonight feels unfinished, or uncertain, or carrying more weighting than you would like, Genesis offers a quiet kind of company. Nearly every person in this book waited for something. A child, a homecoming, a reconciliation, a promise not yet fulfilled. Abraham waited decades for a son. Jacob waited 20 years to be reconciled with his brother. Joseph waited years in prison for a forgotten promise to be remembered. And in each case, quietly, in God's own time, the waiting was not wasted. There is a reason this old book still comforts people, thousands of years after it was first written down. It does not pretend that life is simple, or that good people never suffer, or that families are ever without their quiet fractures. It simply insists, gently again and again, that God has not stepped away from any of it. Think back for a moment over everyone we have met tonight. A couple hiding among garden trees, two brothers in an open field, a family crowded onto a wooden ark, a father climbing a mountain beside his only son, two brothers wrestling with 20 years of silence between them, and a young man forgotten in a prison cell, still trusted by God even there. Every family we have met tonight carried its own quiet fractures. Favoritism, rivalry, deception, long silences between people who loved each other imperfectly. And in every single case, across every generation, God kept working through exactly those imperfect, complicated, very human families, rather than waiting for a more perfect one to come along. Genesis does not end with every question answered. It ends, instead, with a family still waiting, still trusting, still holding on to a promise not yet fully seen. In that sense, it ends very much where most of us find ourselves. How often this story slows down to rest inside a single, ordinary moment. A conversation beside a well, a meal shared beneath a tree, a father and son walking quietly up a mountain together. Genesis does not rush toward its ending. It lingers, patiently, inside the very lives it is telling us about. The same patience we are invited to borrow tonight. And now, as the rain continues quietly outside, you may rest. You do not need to carry every worry into tomorrow. The story is still in God's hands. Lord, thank you for being faithful through every generation we have heard about tonight. From the first morning light to this quiet night, so many years and so many miles later. Thank you for the reminder that you are a God who creates, who keeps promises, and who works even through ordinary, imperfect people. The same way you worked through every name we have heard tonight. Bring peace to every person listening tonight, wherever they are, and whatever they are carrying, quietly into this evening. Calm anxious thoughts, comfort tired hearts, and give rest to those who need it most tonight, in body and in mind. Help us trust that even when we cannot see the whole story, you are still at work, quietly, faithfully, the same way you worked through Noah and Abraham and Jacob and Joseph. Across years, none of them could have fully understood at the time. For those who feel far from home tonight, be near to them, the way you were near to Hagar in the wilderness and to Jacob on his stone pillow. Far from anywhere he recognized. For those who are waiting on a promise that feels long delayed, help them trust your timing, the way Abraham and Sarah eventually learned to trust it, even after years of doubt and laughter. For those carrying old hurt between themselves and someone they love, soften their hearts, the way you softened Esau's, and give them the courage Joseph found to forgive what once seemed unforgivable. And for anyone still awake, still listening, still turning tonight's worries over quietly in their mind, grant them the same quiet rest you built into creation itself. On that very first seventh day, for anyone carrying a grief that has not yet healed, be near to them the way you were near to Jacob, mourning a son he believed lost forever. For anyone feeling forgotten in the season of waiting, remind them gently that you saw Hagar in the wilderness, and you have not stopped seeing anyone since. For anyone who has hurt someone they love and does not know how to make it right, give them Joseph's courage and Esau's open arms. And for anyone who has been hurt by someone they love, help them find, in your own time, the same slow, patient healing this family found across so many difficult years. Thank you that this story does not depend on any of us getting everything right. Thank you that you work through doubt and delay and deep mistakes, and never once let go of what you had promised. Grant us peaceful sleep and renewed strength for tomorrow. Amen. If this quiet journey through Genesis brought you peace, you are welcome to join us again as we continue through the books of the Bible, one peaceful story at a time. Rest well. The rain will keep falling quietly for a while yet.